I fucking hate children. They literally make me sick. When I see babies in a commercial, I start to gag and almost throw up, and I have to look away and mute it. And when I see babies in a stroller, especially when they're crying, I just want to put my foot through the fucking thing and step on it until it's nothing but blood and pulp on the fucking pavement.
But I'm interested in the moral dimension of things.
Yes. Let's get into that.
That's also huge. That's also absolutely huge, because that's the one that I think the vegans like doing the massive crusade against. You see it all the time, like animal cruelty, and then they put that on top of any kind of hurting animals whatsoever. So my first question, because you're once a vegan, obviously, at what point does an animal become deserving of no harm being done by a human? So obviously cows, and you got dogs, and you got chickens. What about an ant? If you step on an ant, are you an immoral person? What about a stick insect? Can you snap it for fun? And if not, why not? Or an Irishman? You know, when do you become worthy of human rights, or whatever term you want to use?
I think this is where it gets philosophically difficult, because what happens is you have to make a reasonable compromise. You have to say, okay, we have to try cause the least amount of suffering. But that doesn't mean we're going to stop. That doesn't mean we're going to save all the ants. Just like we're not going to save all the people in Africa. It's like we're going to try our best to do the most we can, and we'll probably get 80% of the way. Do you know what I mean? Like
someone's going to lift that clip out and be like, he just compared the people in Africa to ants.
you just compared the Irishmen. So I'm gonna
you said
print
Englishman
that up.
first.
I'm going to print that up, and then I'm just going to go and become a politician, take back the North, man. It's pretty straightforward for me now.
A nation once again.
So do you get what I'm saying? It's like utilitarian. It's basically that idea. It's like, how can we do the most amount of good?
Okay. We'll use your framework. What about fish? The fish fit into that framework?
Yeah, that people consider fish is like don't eat fish.
Okay. I was about to say, what about a zebra? That's a pretty obvious one. It's like, I imagine you couldn't eat a fucking zebra.
Like the idea more than anything, I think, is because people get a little too caught up with the extremes. Like the idea is the general thrust of stop eating meat. Like if you're out in the fucking jungle and there's no like vegan restaurants around and you need to survive, it's like, yeah, go and kill a zebra. Like I don't give a fuck. Like, but generally speaking, if we're in a society that eats too much meat, it's probably not the healthiest thing for you. This is their frame. They say it's probably not the healthiest thing for you. You can live optimally without it. Like, what the fuck are you doing? Like,
but the main motivation is the moral one, isn't it?
And so the moral question, this is where it gets tough, is like, all right, that's a practical moral stance. We're talking about morality here. I'm saying it's utilitarian. It's like, what's the most amount of utility we can do with our morals? We can't be perfect. We can't be 100% angels, because that would mean we just meditate until we fade out of existence. But they say, all right, let's try the best we can do. And I think that's actually a fairly hard argument to go against. It's like, well, try cause the least amount of suffering you can. I think that's a pretty tough one. That's a tough moral argument, and I give them kudos for that. But when you take their logic to the extreme, this is where Nietzsche comes in. And what they're enacting is the idea of equality, or they're deifying comfort or non-suffering into the pedestal of sacrificing yourself for it. Yeah. Now, I would posit that the instincts of life are to cause suffering for the sake of your own vitality. Life is no qualms about murder or death for the sake of one's own vitality. It won't kill out of cruelty. Now, cruelty is a bad thing, but life doesn't necessarily. Life is rarely cruel. Life is more brutal in serving itself. It's selfish. It takes the woolly mammoth. It takes the animal. It takes the resources from the other people in order to make itself vital. And I think that is an interesting problem, because the vegan idea is, in some sense, as we say, Christian or anti-life or nihilistic in Nietzsche's frame. And it says, okay, we've got to assume that suffering is bad, and we've got to look at these poor animals and we've got to try save them from their suffering. And so it becomes quite religious, even though most of these people are secular. It becomes quite religious in its substructure, in its archetype. It's like, okay, these animals don't deserve this. Suffering is bad, and we're causing suffering to them, and we should feel guilty about this. You know?
Yes, I like both of them. I think they're both philosophically sound. So this is what annoys me about utilitarians, or people who claim to have a moral philosophy in general, like guiding principles, they're inconsistent. And we've talked about this one before, but do you know a vegan who would also have an abortion? The answer is probably yes. So what you're doing is you're saying that isn't a human, or that doesn't hit the threshold of you not killing it, but a zebra does, or an owl does.
That's a great point. That's a great point.
Cat. So which is it? You can say whatever you want, but it's how you act that matters and shows your true intentions. So what is it? What God are you worshipping? Is it the nice, compassionate one, or is it you looking morally virtuous but secretly wanting freedom? That's
how, if we say Jesus tells you to pray inside where no one else sees, because you're not supposed to show your virtue to anybody but God. Whereas you kind of get the sense that maybe there's a big part of the vegan movement that's trying to get a catharsis because they hate themselves. They feel guilty about being human, and so they want to pay back, and they want to be like, I'm sorry, life. Here I'm going to become vegan, but like I will also, kill a couple of babies in my lifetime for the sake of pleasure at the same time. Yeah,
and that's perfectly reasonable. I can't see how you would argue with that except saying that's just silly. But it's like, answer the inconsistent moral question then.
I think that does fairly call out their psychological bias, but I don't think that damages the philosophical stance. And I'll explain to you why I think the philosophical stance is scary. Only scary is that they're positing that if we take the Christian ideal of all life, so everything that has a consciousness, so it begins with the idea of the soul. It says that anything that is a consciousness is valuable. That's where it starts with. Jesus says we all have souls. Everything with a consciousness is valuable. We should treat it that way. And as we mature that idea, we say, okay, we shouldn't, generally speaking, we should try not to kill anybody in our society. We should try and make our society as pro-human as possible. And then you reach a problem where you look at animals and you say to yourself, okay, do animals have souls? And this is where it starts getting muddy, because there's plenty of evidence to show that they have self-reflection, that elephants do funeral rites. They definitely feel pain. Like, I don't know, anybody who tries to argue against that is just a fucking liar. And it's like, it becomes a really difficult problem because it's quite clear that animals do have consciousness. They do have souls. They do have an experience. They do have a subjectivity. They do have a sense of self. And most importantly, they do have a sense of pain and suffering. And so to take that Christian ideal of like everything with a soul is valuable, and we should try, I guess, mix it with a little bit of secular Buddhism and say we should try reduce the amount of suffering we cause onto the world because suffering is bad. You start to reach this position where, okay, well, we have to expand this onto animals. And I don't think there's any way that argument is assailable without doing one thing. I think the only way you can assail that argument is saying that, no, okay, assuming everything is equal and deserves to be saved is just pathological and nihilistic. It's too crazy, because it just goes to a rationalized. When you rationalize it out, it just goes so insane that you have to save ants. You have to waste away. It chooses the world over you. It's essentially anti-self. It's anti-life. It's nihilistic. And so the only solution to that is actually to violate. It undercuts Christian morality. It undercuts secular morality and puts you in a position where you have to essentially accept Nietzsche's frame, where it's like it's a world of will to power and vitality. And that's why I eat meat. I eat meat because I'm a indominant, vital beast, and I'm a superior animal. And that puts us in a really difficult position, because then we're into a world that's based on not flattening everything out and making everything fair, but positing us in a hierarchy, essentially. And that does not stop at humanity, because that means humanity is part of that evolutionary hierarchy. That means that there are some humans that are superior to others, and then suddenly you're into a race situation. And then the moral integrity of the two things become very, very difficult. So one is like a steep hierarchy, and the other is a flat, death, murderous plane. And so anybody who says, oh, the vegans are wrong for a moral sense, also have to somewhat sacrifice much of the Christian morals, which I find is a very difficult problem for me to reason out. Do you see what I'm getting at there?
I see what you're doing there. I'd like to actually follow that thought a bit further rather than try and do a little rebuttal to it, because I get really, really, really stuck there. So when it comes to human hierarchies, then you said it becomes a problem of race. You don't mean race by skin color, of course. You mean like one group versus another, right?
Pretty much, like it becomes this sense that maybe race is the wrong way to put it, but like let's put it this way: it's like, all right, animals are inferior to humans. That's what we're going to say, so we can eat them. We're just going to say that. We're just going to say, let's just make a distinction, all right? So if animals are inferior to humans, that means that there's a hierarchy of value, and what is that based on? And you like, there's many possibilities: intelligence, virtue. We don't really know. But that means within the context of human society, whoever displays the most of whatever characteristic you choose is higher up the hierarchy than everybody else. And that puts you in a problem, because then say, are you allowed to kill off autistic people who lack intelligence to the extent that humans? Like, where do you draw the line? Like, what happens there? You're in eugenic.
That's where I don't see the leap. So I can understand that some humans are better than others, quote unquote, based on a particular characteristic, because it's obvious. It's like some people have a higher IQ, some people have a lower IQ, so some people are better at painting, some people aren't. So you and then of course if you bring it in this argument, you have the hierarchy of potential to do harm and power over other people. That's not necessarily what humans value though in the way they organize their societies. So we don't organize our societies on power. It just doesn't happen. Or else we would see the weaker people in the street. You wouldn't have school systems, for example. Like you wouldn't have groups for like lower, less intelligent people. We would just be done with them. So what is it that humans value most? It's not,
well,
it's not power.
if you want to be brutal, we organize our hierarchies pretty much entirely on. No, entirely is bullshit. We organize our hierarchies. We'd like to organize our hierarchies on virtues, but we don't. That's not how it plays out. That's usually in small communities, but not in big societies.
They're organized on usefulness.
So it's usefulness. And that's a big problem, because what do you do with someone who's not useful? A homeless person, an autistic person, a sick person. Well, you're in a eugenic situation right there. You're saying those people are less valuable. And if it's genetic, as in if it's like someone autistic, then you're like, oh, well, damn, they're literally not as valuable as the rest of the humans. And that puts you in that frame of thinking where you're in a bit of a stuck position. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes, but there's a difference between what you think and what you act out in that particular situation. So you can say that some people are useless. So we could say a severely disabled child, it's useless to society, it's just a burden. That's not how society acts. The mother is still going to get meaning from wanting to take care of it, as are people around it. It's like naturally attracted. I don't know why that is, and the reason why it is irrelevant. It's simply that's the way society functions. It's like we function on usefulness in our hierarchies mostly, but then you also have some weird fluff going on down the bottom to stop people dropping out. I don't know why that is. I have no idea why that is, but that's just the way things are.
I still think that's been a bit too idealistic. Like if we look at what the Spartans did, for example, they had no qualms about killing a weak child. I do think that I'd like to think that we don't let people drop out, but homeless people die in the streets all the time. You know, if a guy's ugly and he doesn't have a job and he's a loser, he's not going to get any attention off anybody. Like it's just people are killing themselves plenty, like, you know, all across the world all the time. And I think that what I'm getting at is that our nature is tyrannical, and if we are to
what about a mother's nature though? So you're saying our nature. Well, like what about a mother that gives birth to a disabled child? Are you saying the Spartan women wanted to get rid of those children, or was it the Spartan men, with their duty and their power for the good of society, taking those children away and killing them?
I think it was the pathology of the Spartan patriarchy that would say these won't make great warriors. We're going to keep our genetic pool clean. Kill the child.
So in which case, why is that a pathology in your worldview?
Pathology, I meant in the sense of like perspective.
Okay, gotcha.
Maybe I used that word wrong, and if so, comment below and say Stefan used the word wrong. Please eugenicize him. That is.
I know this isn't necessarily on the vegan carnivorism thing currently, but I'm just very interested in this particular train of thought.
Well,
because I don't want it to be true, but I actually agree with you. But at the same time, I disagree with you on the bottom bit, where I think there's something missing. And
I'm not trying to say this is true. I'm not trying to say this is like, I do think this is the reality, but I'm not trying to say this is where we're at. This is how it has to be. I'm saying that this is a very big problem. Just like reading Nietzsche is a very big problem. Lots of people like to say, oh, well, Nietzsche, he was just a lonely fool. But I'm like, yeah, you don't get to dispense with the problem that he's bringing up. He's bringing up this problem. He's saying that true morals, as we understand them, which are essentially secularized Christian morals, are anti-life. They're nihilistic when you take them to their logical conclusion. And if you want to develop a society that is pro-life, pro-vitality, then you have to accept the Spartan way of life, which was a pursuit of excellence at the expense of even children to a massive extent.
Isn't nihilism a trick word there, though, to try and get that visceral emotional reaction? Because why would the Spartan way of life be better than not doing the Spartan way of life? Why would Spartan be better than Christianity? Why is it necessarily nihilistic as that specific word?
So if you think about a gene pool and you allow impure genes into a gene pool, they degrade the gene pool. The more fair you make, the more you flatten a hierarchy, the less excellence there is, the more entropy there is. Like flattening equality is the same as equilibrium, the same as entropy. And so Christianity is about entropizing, it's about reducing the hierarchy. And so if you go back to a steep hierarchy, you will have an excellent specimen at the top, but you will lose a lot of depth at the bottom. But in order to make it flat, you think it's noble to make it flat, but what you're doing is you're actually killing the extremes, you're killing the excellence. And that's actually a very negative thing as well. So it's a very difficult problem.
Excellence in what capacity?
So the Spartans would have had a very warrior excellence. They'd have a very, very sense of like supreme physical specimens, you know.
Okay, so why couldn't Christianity be developed by the unconscious mind and tested out over 2,000 years as a way of producing the most stable society, where you don't get the resentful people at the bottom trying to tear you to pieces, and you don't have the people at the top trying to tear them to pieces. So it's flattened more, but it still leaves room for excellence in earning money and providing for your family, for example. So it allows freedom for maintenance of stability, but has moral excellence in this particular context.
Hey, that's a fair point. That's a fair point. That they pedestalize their hierarchy is a hierarchy of morality, and so the winner is always the good man.
Yeah.
But again, this is Nietzsche's challenge, which is utterly devastating. Is that he says that all the good man is someone who is tolerable. A good man is actually an emasculated man. A good man is not a warrior king like Alexander the Great. A good man is someone who, doesn't raise his voice. A good man is someone who keeps his head down and does his job and stabilizes his community.
Is that Nietzsche's critique of Christian society in the 19th century, or is it of the Bible? Because that's not what Jesus was like. Because Jesus was an outspoken person who got killed for it. He was morally excellent. He was a troublemaker.
Nietzsche had great respect for Jesus, but I think Nietzsche is getting more at the idea of the end result of playing out this rational position, where you try to where you promote, where you pedestalize, where you have to choose something to put on a pedestal. So if the Spartans chose physical excellence, they would sacrifice everything for that physical excellence. That creates a steep hierarchy of excellence. And so what it seems like he's getting at is the Christian idea, and this is the vegan idea, is that you pedestalize equality. And in order to pedestalize equality, that means you pedestalize everybody being the same. You sacrifice everything to try and make everything the same. And that's actually what death does. That's the same instinct as death. It's a death instinct. That's what he's getting at. It's essentially a death cult. That's an extremely intense idea. And I find it very hard to argue against. And that's actually the vegan idea. But then anybody who condemns veganism is condemning that idea, which I think is a fair argument. But then you must, in some extent, accept the Spartan view of the world, which is an extremely intense idea that I don't think most people who condemn veganism are in any way prepared to deal with. So I do think it is a massive, massive problem. And I don't know what to do about it.
I mean, there is another way out of the veganism carnivore thing. I guess my issue is on Nietzsche's critique of Christian morality then, because I don't agree that makes it a will to death or a death cult, because he's basically equating complete equality with being equal on some dimensions, or seeing value in everybody equally as something of potential, something of divine potential. I don't see the two are exactly the same at all. I can see they have certain things in common, but they're both very different things.
Well, let's talk less about what Nietzsche was hypothesizing and our understanding of it, and let's talk more about how his prophecy played out. So if you look at what's happening in the world right now, is that there is an onus and an emphasis put on equality, and what you see now is the genders are trying to get blended into this one mush. You see that men are getting turned into castrated freaks and emasculated. You see that women are turning into tomboys, and they're becoming too career focused and too aggressive, and it's everything's starting to destabilize because everything's trying to equalize,
100%.
which is an astounding problem, because Nietzsche's saying that the reason why that's happening is because people are fundamentally over focusing on morality. And he said that it would be more healthy, it'd actually be more stable if they were a bit more rootless in their thinking, and they leaned over towards this Spartan way of looking at the world, and they were more brutal and said, okay, hierarchies are exist on competence alone, and women are excluded from them and stuff like that. I'm not saying that's the way it should be, but do you get what I'm saying? That he was framing that these more intense things tend to be more stable, and the more you try to equalize things, it's actually the more you make things unstable, and that's a problem. It's a massive problem, massive philosophical problem. Massive philosophical problem.
Yes, it definitely is. I still don't see how. Well, I completely agree with you that everything's becoming merged together. So transgenderism is a merging of the two genders where it doesn't matter, basically, and then feminism is trying to say that being man and woman doesn't matter. So what that does is it's taking all the categories and say it doesn't matter. So yeah, you're completely right. It's like flattening down everything, but that's not the same thing as a moral flattening, because the moral flattening says there's a spark of divinity in everybody, you're all okay, like don't kill each other, treat each other within these certain rules because of that particular divinity. The logical extension of that, which as Nietzsche prophesized, I guess you were saying, is not feminism, it's something else. So feminism came off from something else, not from the Judeo-Christian way of doing things. And I don't know specifically what it came off of, except what I think actually was a bastardization of Nietzsche's philosophy, which it's because Nietzsche was he was like this focal point in all of Western philosophy, and you had so many people firing off of him. You had Heidegger coming off of him, and you had the postmodernists coming off him, you had Jung coming off of him, and the postmodernist ones were the ones who want to, because of that will to power, exactly as you're saying, they were like, so everything's power, let's flatten everything. But it's not the logical extension, because maybe Nietzsche's prophecy was wrong. That like that particular one was wrong. So I and therefore his concept of the Übermensch is also wrong, because it's based in something wrong. Like Nietzsche was a very, very smart man. He was doing very good things, but in the way you've described it there, in the way I previously understood it, basically what you're implying is that the weird feminism that we've got right now is a logical extension of Jesus Christ. And I don't see that. Seeing a spark of divinity does not mean we all have to be exactly the same on every single dimension.
No, I'm not saying necessarily that Jesus is this is Jesus's ideology. Like, I think Nietzsche himself said this. He said that the last Christian died on the cross. He very much believes that the Christian philosophy was something that was bastardized out of what Jesus actually said. Let's take Jesus out of the equation, and let's talk more necessarily about what came after Jesus. Same way as like we'd like Nietzsche's work not to turn into postmodernism because it meant something else, but it did turn into postmodernism. I think the same can be said about Jesus. So
I completely agree. The Catholic Church did some, the Church in general did some. It's wrong. Basically.
Yeah, so the church creates its model that flows through history, through the collective unconscious. And what Nietzsche was saying is that eventually the Christian thing floated through the astral plane until it reached the 19th century, and he realized that the thing underneath it, God, was gone. And so what it did is it's kind of spilled out into the 20th and 21st century. And what it has done is it's retained some of its philosophical pillars. And one of those is equality. And that pillar is premised on a lot of what Jesus said. Maybe it's not representative of what he said, but it's premised on what he said. And the problem is that no matter whether it's right or wrong, this is what we're acting out. And so feminism, if you want to put it that way, is a result of Jesus, but that's obviously a massive, massive, like logical jump.
Yeah. Okay.
It's more like a long-term flow down the river. And it seems like, feminism is more of a product of the philosophy of equality, the deification of equality. I think the most important thing to understand here is the deification, the thing that we hold as, the thing that we pedestalize, the thing we put on a pedestal. And if we put equality on a pedestal, we reach conclusions like feminism, we reach conclusions like nihilism. Nihilism is the pedestalizing of equality. That's a very sad thing to admit. And we reach the conclusions of veganism. And so my contest with anybody who is anti-vegan is like, I understand why you're anti-vegan, but I don't think you're being intellectually consistent. And I'm not blaming you for that. It's hard to be intellectually consistent. But I think when you think it through, you hit a very difficult problem. Because if you say animals are not equal to us, well, then you're sort of saying that no one's equal to nothing. You're de-pedestalizing equality in favor of either rationality, which is just stupid anyway, because rationality leads you back to there, or you're doing it for pure, it's almost like subjective will to excellence. It's like human vitality matters more than anything. My vitality matters more than anything, so vitality gets pedestalized. And then you're in a Spartan position. And I think that is Nietzsche's revaluation of values in play. And I just think it's a huge problem. I don't know what to do about it, man. I really don't know what to do about it.
You were hinting on the reevaluation of all values. I don't know what the hell he would have. I know in some of his books he said, I am the only person who's ever been capable of reevaluating all values. And it's like, of course you bloody say that. I do think there's another way out, though. And it comes down to, if you say animals don't have rights for another reason. So if you think about what a right is, animals don't have them technically. Now, this is where I reach the apex of my particular thinking on this topic. So I could say, in order to have a right, you need to bear the responsibility of that right. So my right to freedom of speech is your responsibility to allow me to have it. Otherwise, I don't get freedom of speech, regardless of what the hell you say. So a right and responsibility are two sides of the same coin. So you could say, well, animals don't have rights because they cannot bear responsibility. Fair enough. Does that mean we can do whatever the hell we want to animals? And it's like, yes.
Does that mean
right?
Does that mean children don't have rights?
So that becomes another one too, which I do have and I do have an address to that. But so if they don't have, does that mean you can go ahead and cause unnecessary suffering to them? But there's something inside us that says no. So could I go? So would there be nothing wrong with you going to my dog and hang drawing and quartering him? like morally speaking, and something inside goes, maybe we shouldn't be causing unnecessary suffering.
It's cruelty.
And it's like, so why is that wrong? What about it? Even though they don't have rights, what about it is wrong? Yeah, so then the unnecessary suffering thing becomes really complicated because, and this is a really good argument. It's like, why the hell don't you eat dogs? It's like, well, I don't want to. It's like, that's not an argument. Why don't you eat dogs or horses? Like, there was a big horse meat scandal in the UK over the last few years. What's wrong with eating a horse? Apart from the fact you didn't know it was a horse meat, obviously, but what's wrong with that? Why can't you eat everything? Why can't you do anything you want? Why can't we go torture animals for fun? So that becomes complicated because I don't want to. It's like this natural thing I want to overcome, right?
That actually brings us back to Nietzsche's frame, is that the reason why you don't eat horses is cultural. The reason why you don't eat dogs is cultural. It's actually sentimental. And cultural means subjective. It's to do with the fact that you just grew up and your reality has a moral sense about it. And so the problem there is that the idea of finding a morality to guide us is we're trying to look for something objective. But again, we fall into the problem of like, what causes us guilty about hurting animals? And we find out that to a large extent, it's cultural, it's subjective. And so we again pull ourselves out of the frame of moral equality in this objective, godlike universe built of rationality like Sam Harris wishes it was. Instead, we're falling back into the problem that all of our moral sentiments, our taste, our predispositions is quite subjective. An Asian person would be like, I'll eat a dog, I don't give a fuck. But you'd be like, dude, that's just weird, I'm not eating a dog. And then you're falling back into the idea of personal. The morality centers around the subjective. And that leads you back into that position of, right, well, what's the most important thing for me? Well, that's vitality, my personal health. And then that leads you back into that rabbit hole, man. And
it definitely depends on what your core moral maxim is. So when Peterson talks about, I guess his main moral maxim is don't cause unnecessary suffering, I think, among other things, but don't cause unnecessary suffering. But then every time he's questioned about veganism, he like laughs it off more or less. And I know we talk a lot about Jordan Peterson as if, why won't he say certain things? I'm sure he's got his own arguments straight, but it's, well, why are you causing unnecessary suffering to animals then? And then he brings up the rights and responsibility thing. It's like, that doesn't matter, you're still causing unnecessary suffering.
Well, the reason why
there is a cut-off between humans and animals. So then the world should be, you can do whatever the hell you want to do to animals. And regardless of how you feel about it, you can't stop the other people. Unless it's your property under law, of course, which my dog would be. But otherwise, we could go kill animals for fun. There's no reason why not.
Yeah. I think that's drawn it to its logical conclusion, and
Yeah.
you realize that it all just falls into subjectivity. It's like, well, it's property. It's human centric. It's in like humans are valuable just because we're humans,
Yes.
and that's a very natural and healthy and life affirming thing. Like the reason why Jordan Peterson kills animals by the fucking truckload every year. For the sake of his vitality, like, and I actually look at, like, my frame would be, look, Jordan, I don't mind. That's fine, man. That's fine if you want to do that. That's fine, because like I don't want you to be depressed all the time. Like, you're a very valuable man, you know what I mean? And like, this is a big question. It's like, maybe you're worth the sacrifice of 2 full ruminants a year. Like that's a justifiable claim. Like Jordan's doing great work. He's motivating a lot of really important things. And the vegans would be very anti that, be like, no human is worth 2 animals. It's like, yeah, they probably are. Like that's just a problem. But when you follow that logic, it's like, yeah, two cows are worth 1 Jordan. How many humans are worth a Jordan? And like, how many? It's the same idea as like a bodyguard will jump in front of the queen. It's like, how many Englishmen are worth the queen?
And
like,
this is why Christianity exists, and their central tenet was, you don't get to play with other people. Like, and that was the point. It's like, you have the spark of divinity, and you, exclusive to humans, you. No matter anything else, you have the spark of divinity. The kingdom of heaven is in you. And that's why you can't touch it.
Yeah. I think, I guess what I'm trying to get at is that someone like Jordan needs to, if he wants to be consistent with this, needs to turn around and say,
he needs to eat people.
He just needs to do it, man. He needs to go into Joe Rogan and just eat a person. That's it. It's that type of idea, because I think this is another thing to get into is human sacrifice was a big deal. Like, that's the most irrational and weirdest thing when you get into it. Like, why did people kill humans? But I think it fundamentally comes down to this idea, is that there was an unconscious sense that sometimes it's worth killing a child for the sake of the health of a great society and great people and great men. That's a really intense idea, but people acted that out before. And that's what they did in Sparta. They sacrificed children for the pedestal of excellence, for a god.
Well, like, if you're based on a pragmatic morality, which I think is the only one you can do, because trying to prove an objective morality, it probably doesn't exist. It's probably wrong, but also it's just impossible. It'd be so.
It's just tough. I'd never say it doesn't exist, because
unless you believe in a metaphysical, of course. But we're presuming, just for argument's sake, there is no metaphysical. If you're acting like a pragmatic world in the Spartan universe, where resources were more scarce, perhaps killing that little crying child would be a necessary thing. So it would actually be a moral good to kill the child, if you want to weigh the things up. But in today's society, where people, it doesn't come down to that life or death situation. It's like, well, why can't the mother be free to keep the child? And who are you to kill that spark of divinity?
That's a tough spot, because then is it necessary to kill animals for food if you've got vegan bodybuilders? If vegan bodybuilders exist, like, is it really necessary? Like, really necessary to kill animals?
Probably not, no.
So there's a fucking problem, man. That's a big problem. In that internalized logic, that you hit a corner. And I don't know what to do about that either. And something I want to say just religiously quickly is that people would sacrifice children. And the premise of Christianity is that Christ sacrificed himself as the divine child, so that we'd never have to sacrifice children again. I think that's a really important symbol. I don't think we have time to get into why that matters, but that's essentially why Christ mattered so much, is that we were in that position in society where we were using Moloch to kill children, which is so intense. It's so crazy. It's so crazy the way we sacrifice things. And the whole idea was Christ was God's son, and God said, he was a metaphysical idea. He said, I will give you my son, and you'll never have to sacrifice a child of yours again. And that introduced real morality into the world. And that's an amazing idea, but I don't know. I think, as we said, that introduces an idea, but then when we play it out into its rationality where we are now, we get into a difficult position. At least in my head, anyway, because I'm probably just fucking deluded by Nietzsche at this point.
No, it's definitely, I definitely follow up to your problem. And there are a few moral absolutes you'd have to take, but then the consequences of them would be quite dire. So I tell you what, rather than continue on this and keep going around, not in circles, but trying to sort this stuff out, we should come back for a part 2 on this once I've reread all of Nietzsche's work, so I can destroy it and burn it. But
I must add just at the end is that the problem with Jordan is that he is sacrificing animals for his vitality, and
yes,
and so the problem is that he maintains a Christian architecture of values. Otherwise, he says well-being matters. He sat there with Sam Harris, and he said that Sam Harris admitted that veganism is irrationally, because Sam Harris has got these Christian premises as well, and he said veganism makes sense. I actually can't argue against it. He admitted it openly, and I was like, "Fuck, dude, fair play to you." Like, I'm not looking for people to turn vegan, but I don't want them to bullshit themselves. You know what I mean?
You're trying to figure out people's inconsistencies because it's fun and it upsets people.
Yeah, that's it. I really like playing the game, and I think
you're trying to be a Nietzsche of today, where he was philosophized with a hammer, and you're like going back to his grave, you're picking up the hammer, and going, "Daddy, can I play with this? I've got some work to finish." You're like, "Dung, dung, 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 dung." It's like, God's sake.
I got some cows to hammer, man. Yeah, there is that sense where I do. Look, I don't even mind if people want to use cognitive dissonance to save themselves. Like, that's why I don't believe in flat Earth. Is simply just I live in this path of cognitive dissonance right now. Like, I don't mind that. I don't mind people not having that. But then you get people who are, shall we say, moral crusaders, and like someone like Jordan, and he's telling you, right, like, what's up and all that. And I'm sort of like, dude, like, all right, I get it. You're very valuable in so many aspects of your life, and you've revitalized mythology and given a lot of hope to men, but there is this sort of sense that there's a little bit of a lie in one of your most fundamental problems, which is the moral problem. And this is again what Nietzsche said, is that this problem of Christian morality, this flattening equality thing getting invalidated by the realities of how we actually act, is so profoundly powerful and scary, and we don't take it serious enough because it's coming anyway. And so I guess that's my stance. I see it.
One final word, I guess. That's why you need a metaphysical, or else it all falls apart.
And that's a fantastic point. Is that this is exactly my conclusion? Is that the only way I can see Christian morality surviving, the only way I can see Nietzsche being wrong. There's only one way I can see Nietzsche being wrong. Now, I could be wrong. There could be others, but the only one way is that he had a first principle. So you have to dig down to his first principles. One of his first principles was that there is no metaphysical world. There's only the Darwinian fallen materialistic world. That's all there is. So he took away this upper world and said there's no God, there's no heaven, there's nothing real. And so we're all down here. We're all trapped here. And so if you follow his premise from there, saying that we live in a scientific world of materialistic fallenness, well, you're fucked. You're back into Spartan. Like, that's what happens. But
you're free to choose what you want, and you would also be, like, it wouldn't necessarily be you'd have to go back to Sparta, because I don't necessarily think one is right or wrong over the other per se. I can see critiques with Christianity, but that doesn't mean you have to go back to Sparta, because then without the metaphysical, you would be all over the place.
Let me put it this way. The unconscious will bring you back to Sparta. And what I mean by that is that despite these people telling us that they're for equality, they have sanctioned abortions in most Western countries now. So they're back to sacrificing children. They're doing the Sparta. They're right back to sacrificing children. It's astounding how the unconscious works. It gets you there in the end. And so the only solution I can see to that is an actual genuine belief in a metaphysic. And that would be to posit that there's a God, and God is trying to use this reality to create a kingdom. And he's sort of saying, if you behave as I'd like you to behave in this kingdom has a certain morals, and maybe that's equality. And if you behave that way, at the end of time, I'll put you in that kingdom. And so that gives you an actual genuine reason to die for something that doesn't exist, for a metaphysic. And that's the only way I can see out of it. If you're not willing to die for your morals, you don't really believe in them. And that's a big problem. So if you have no metaphysic, you're only really willing to die for yourself, and by extension, your genetic blueprint, which is your race and your family. And that's a Spartan world, man, as far as I can see. Nietzsche has fucked me up, by the way.
That's why you're sitting in a dark room ranting about race.
Yeah, like I'm getting darker.
So what we go from Sparta to the one true God, and then the one true God dies. You're left with a little bit of Christianity, and then you go back to Sparta again. Mm-hmm. Maybe that's the way the Christian aeon is meant to go.
And this is what's fucking fascinating about that is that isn't that what the satanic ideals are?
Yes.
Child sacrifice, grounding, returning to the earth.
Yes.
Down, 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 heaviness, darkness, death, brutality, antichrist values. And what did Nietzsche write? The Antichrist. And that's some astounding stuff, man. But like, I'm not convinced that there's no such thing as a metaphysic. I'm becoming more and more convinced that shit's legit. So.
Oh yeah. I'm as far as I'm concerned, people who say there's not a metaphysical, you can't prove that. So it doesn't mean Nietzsche's necessarily right. We don't know what consciousness is. Mm-hmm. No idea. Nothing. Yeah. So, and I guess on that, after this long video, thank you everybody for checking in today. I love you all. Please click the subscribe button, rate 5 stars, retweet this. Please print off a transcript of this video and be buried with it because it was just so good. So goodbye everybody. I appreciate you all. And
make sure you sacrifice a goat or a vegetable. I don't mind which. I'd prefer a vegetable. It's better for you.
Wait. By vegetable, do you mean like a disabled person?